Approximately 10 to 12 students transferred over to my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school this week from another Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school in town because they found out that the head instructor, the black belt there, was married but having adulterous affairs with his students. And then some more research, they find out that not only has this black belt been arrested multiple times for domestic violence, he's also been convicted multiple times for domestic violence. And that's what's going to be this week's question of the week. I am al-Aziz, the owner and head instructor of Semper Fortis Jiu-Jitsu here in San Antonio, Texas. And I'm going to talk about role models and what it means to be a black belt and what that expertise actually is. And the bottom line is when a person is a black belt, it indicates, regardless of the martial art that they're in, that they have expertise in that particular martial art. But it does not indicate that they are necessarily a good person. And that's what you're going to have to research and find out about each person that's teaching in whatever role that they have in your life. Don't automatically assume that, oh, they're a black belt, they're an expert in a bunch of stuff, and they should be a role model for me and my children, because they may very well not be a good person. They may be good at a martial art, but they may actually be a terrible person. And in the example I've given you, it is an example of a terrible person that nobody should train with. And I think the big problem we have as a society, not just in martial arts, but in society as a whole, is we put people on a pedestal and we make them role models and we treat them almost in a heroic fashion because they're really good at a sport, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, golf, tennis, or because they're really good at singing a song, or they're really good at acting in movies, or there's some really dynamic politician, or there's some inventive, creative business person, and we put them on a pedestal and we're like, oh, this person is a role model. And they are unquestionably very talented in that particular area, but role models for life, that's to be seen. And in many cases, the problem is we make excuses for these individuals' poor performance. There is no excuse for what this instructor was doing. Your first sign of a bad instructor is, whether they're married or not, if they're having relationships with their students. That's totally inappropriate. And people can disagree with me in the comments. I don't care, because truth is the truth. It's the same thing if you go to college and your college professor is sleeping with one of the students in their English class or in the math class. You'd be like, well, they're both consenting adults. No, the professor is in a position of authority. They're in a position of power, and it's absolutely inappropriate for them to sleep with their students. And that's why most colleges will terminate a professor if they catch them in a relationship with their student, because it is inappropriate. Same thing in business, across the board. You're not supposed to, when you're charged with teaching somebody or leading someone, you're not supposed to have an affair with them. You're not supposed to have a relationship with them. Find your dating pool somewhere else. And when you're married, that just shows that you have no honor. You have no integrity. It's like, well, that's a new thing. Oh, we shouldn't judge them. We don't know their situation. Oh, we absolutely should judge people before we make them role models. It's like, oh, you're married and you're having an affair? Oh, and you've been convicted multiple times on domestic violence? Oh no, you're just not a good person. That's what it is. There's no sugarcoating. And it's not just this instructor that I'm disappointed in. You see it when people are like, oh, this MMA fighter, he's a role model to me. Been convicted multiple times, on various drug uses and DUIs. The last DUI, ran a stop sign, T-boned a lady in a car who was pregnant, ended up breaking her arm, and then this so-called role model fled the scene on foot. And then they realized, oh shoot, I left my money and my drugs in the car. So they came back to the car, collected the money and the drugs, and then fled the scene again. Didn't come back to help the pregnant lady that you injured. No, came back to, collect my belongings. And then people were like, oh, who are we to judge? But he's an amazing fighter. Sure, just a terrible human. It's like, Or, like you see it with, musicians, what Elvis was, he was 24 when he met his wife, Priscilla, who was 14. In what world is it okay for a 24-year-old to have a relationship with a 14-year-old? And then people are like, oh, well, she was very mature for her age. Really? Is that what you got? I'm like, so, and you look at these entertainers and it's like, these athletes that you put on a pedestal, or people that you put in a position being a role model, and ask yourself, do they deserve that position? Because if they are showing signs that they are immoral, that they do not have honor, no, they should not be a role model for you. And no, you shouldn't, train with them or, follow them to their concerts or watch their movies. Like, they're not your role models. So I say be very particular for who you pick to be your role model. But also when you pick, for instance, you pick a martial arts school, don't make excuses for somebody's bad behavior just because they're very talented, just because they seem to be very wise. If they're showing you signs that, hey, they have a moral issue, like believe what you see, investigate that and make sure that, this person is not taking advantage of you. Because that's what we're getting at here, is we're assuming that because a person is very talented in something that, they're qualified to be a role model, or that maybe they're a good person, when in many cases we're finding out, no, they're not good people. So that's my answer to this week's question of the week. Choose your role models wisely and believe what your eyes tell you. Watch people, especially like if you're entrusting people with your children, like watch them, like be like, hey, is this the kind of person I want teaching my child? Or teaching you something, whether it's they're teaching you math, science, martial arts, whatever they're teaching, they're a coach in football, is this a coach that is truly a role model, or is this somebody that's, a psychopath? You got to check that out and believe what you see. So that's the answer to this week's question of the week. Got an answer for next week's question, or a question for next week? Feel free to fire below. And of course, if you got comments for this, feel free to fire below here on YouTube and we can have our discussions. All right. Till next week. Ciao.